Thank you, Gene. We were at two things. We were just in Otis's apartment, and more than that, as everybody knows, about 5 years ago, this was empty. Empty of residents. It wasn't empty. And we also went up to the rooftop, and that gives you a whole nother perspective, not only here on the west side, but an incredible perspective on the whole city and all the promise and challenges that the city has as it relates to housing and investment, not just in housing, but in neighborhoods and communities. And this is actually, I'm hoping, a good discussion about not only housing, but also how we invest in neighborhoods and communities in addition to housing and how that complements all the other type of investments. As we were just talking to Otis at his own place, where he shops, where his kids live and work, and those are the realities of what the policies we talk about actually come to life.
Great. So, I'm Helene Gayle, and I'm the president and CEO of the Chicago Community Trust, and I have been, thank you. I was asked to lead a fireside chat around this issue
without the
of
fire,
housing.
but the heat
and,
from outside.
Yeah, and I was going to say, several people said, well, yeah, well, fireside chat, where's the fire? Well, hopefully we're not going to create any here. We'll create more light than fire. Yeah. But it's really my honor and privilege to be able to engage in this. And, you know, my background, I'm a physician. I am not an expert in housing. So I think of these things in terms of the way we attack all issues in medicine. You have a diagnosis, you look for the context of it, and then you think about what the treatment is. So in that regard, you know, let's just start out. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on, you know, what do you see when you think about the picture of housing broadly here in Chicago? What are some of the issues? And, you know, what is your diagnosis of what the challenges are, and then some of your sense of the treatment? We'll go into more detail on some of the specifics, but in a kind of a broad vision.
Well, let me, I was saying this a tad earlier, so I just want everybody to know, I just had kind of major oral surgery. So if the mayor starts drooling, it's not because he's having a stroke or anything like that. I just want everybody to know that. I said, but don't have an emergency, just in case it happens, okay?
You know, I'm here.
Yeah.
And, you know.
In case anybody wants to do, you know, CPR or anything like that. So here is, since I'm also from a medical family, although I tell my mother I'm not a doctor, I'm a spin doctor. But I actually look at it both, what are the challenges, but what are the opportunities? And let me try to take one or two steps back. I think one of the challenges in the past was that housing was only looked at as housing. But housing without, taking Otis as an example, but all this, housing without a grocery store, housing without transportation, housing without a library, schools, is housing. Everything else is a neighborhood and a community. And I think I would like to think that what Chicago is trying to do is change the paradigm from just looking at housing into building neighborhoods and communities. And I think that's the first thing that I think we try to approach. And doing all our investments in, I don't want to just say coordinated, but kind of flooding the zone type of approach. And try to put what we're doing as it relates to affordable housing and investments in housing in the context of building neighborhoods and communities. Now, in my congressional and chief of staff days, I was dealing with a housing massive recession where people's mortgages were here and their values were here. We have the inverse of that, not the inverse, but not that problem totally today, which is you have now issues where you have gentrification and try to have affordability in long-time residents. You have other neighborhoods in the city of Chicago where you have empty lots, empty homes, and boarded up homes. So we don't have one housing issue. We have a series of things, and that means then we have to have a series of tools and approaches that reflect the diversity of the challenge and also the opportunities. And I do look at things like what is happening in Washington Park, what we're doing in Woodlawn, Bronzeville, some of the things that we're trying in West Town, Milwaukee, and about to do in Pilsen and Little Village as different approaches to meeting the building of neighborhoods and communities. So part of this is about housing and affordability. But a bigger part of it and the bigger mission is that you're, wherever you want to live, you can afford to live and raise your family and your children to go to school there. And that's my overall 10,000 feet goal. And all this, in the end of the day, are tools to achieve wherever you want to live, you can afford to live there and raise your family there, but also then build viable neighborhoods and communities in that process. And I really do think going back, I don't want to, but 4 decades or long, housing without all the other pieces is just housing. And one last way of trying to think about this, in 4 different neighborhoods, we're doing public housing with great world architects and a neighborhood library in them. Nowhere else in the city, in the country, are they doing that. And that's kind of a symbolic and emblematic of that different approach. A neighborhood library that serves the entire community with either senior citizen, veteran, public housing, etc., but doing it with world-class architects. And I think that shows the approach of building a neighborhood and a community, not just housing as standalone as if it's an island in and of itself.
You know, it's always, yep, clap for that, that's good. So a couple things, still at the 1,000-foot level, how would you put Chicago in context with other cities? You've lived at the national level. You know, what do you think are some of the unique challenges that Chicago may have that others don't, as well as some of the unique opportunities?
Well, one is we have 77 neighborhoods. So I wouldn't say we have 77 challenges, but we have.
One thing that I learned, you know, as somebody new in Chicago, 77 neighborhoods. Everybody can recite that.
Right. Well, the truth is we have a great that gives you both history as well as, well, like I said to you when we were looking outside, this is both the promise and the peril of, that we're looking at, because you have an incredible view of the whole scape in wide lens of Chicago. And you and I both walked up there and were like, wow.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you know, if you just look straight down, it is also wow, but a different type of wow. So here's what I think. What do we have similar? The 10 major cities of America are all dealing with gentrification. People who have been in a neighborhood long-standing, have been advocating for their neighborhood, wanted to see improvements. Now the improvements have outpaced their income. That's not unique to Chicago. New York's dealing with it. San Francisco's doing it. Seattle's dealing with it. I don't want to run through all the cities, but you get it. Everybody's dealing with this at one level or another. And right now in Westtown and Wicker Park, or in Milwaukee, we have different policies we're trying to deal with that. Pretty soon in Pilsen and Little Village, we're working with the aldermen. We think we have a different approach, but it's another way we're going to test how to handle, or not handle, but allow improvements in the neighborhood, but not at the expense of longtime residents and affordability. In other neighborhoods, which is unique to, I would say somewhat unique to Chicago, but probably not for the older cities, but the newer cities, they don't. We have empty lots. And I think taking what was a pilot that we then blew out, which is called our large lot program, where a resident can buy a lot for $1, turn it into a community garden, et cetera, really has worked unbelievably beyond the pilot. Now it's close to about 3,600 lots have gone. We're now going to use that strategy to try to see if we can't start to build affordable housing in 6 different neighborhoods, not just community gardens. I think while there are other cities with empty lots, I think Chicago has more than its fair share. I think we have a unique policy. So that may be a distinguishable piece to it. I don't know how you can have a conversation about Chicago that doesn't also talk about its both income and racial segregation, which is long-standing in the city, and say I don't think that's totally unique, but it's very, the demarcations are very clear. And so some things we're facing other cities are facing, and some things are either unique or really dramatically defined in the city. And so that's how I would say on a comparative basis. Now, the other thing I would say is we also, because of size and scope, have a lot of housing that's single family, more than, take a New York, for example. So that's both an opportunity as you think about affordability and, again, the goal of building neighborhood and community.
So I love the vision of housing not being a standalone and not a sector, and the importance of neighborhood development in and housing in that context. But those are always very challenging things. We all talk about, you know, collaboration, coordination across bureaucratic lines. how are you, kind of in a practical way, handling that and making sure that in fact that coordination is happening, and so that that flooding of zones is actually, that you're putting your resources in a way that concentrates and builds that kind of neighborhood vitality?
All right. So we all know. I mean, we all know that at least on the south and west side, we have people depopulation, loss of population. But there's also 4 to 5 neighborhoods that are bucking that trend. So I don't want to play social scientist, but it's 10 o'clock. I'll play social scientist for a second. Bronzeville, Washington Park, Woodlawn, and Little Village, and South Shore a tad, are all bucking that trend. Washington Park, population's up 10%. Bronzeville, Woodlawn are up, I'm not doing that, I think it's like 3 to 5%. South Shore is holding its own, and Little Village is up 2%. Now, if you take a look at our Neighborhood Now strategy, Woodlawn has a new squash court that we did with a public-private partnership. Excess tennis in Washington Park. Ellis Park, Park District facility in Bronzeville. New train station, new train stations. New housing options, new housing, all 3 across. New schools and investment in schools in that area, new public safety investments, libraries. I believe if you invest in the 5 things that are the fundamentals that the public sector has to do to create what I would call as the standard for a neighborhood and a community is good schools, good parks, good libraries, good transportation, good safety. If you do that, the residential and retail can take hold. And it's not an accident where we have a major, major citywide challenge, principally on the south side and the west side. It's not an accident that there's 4 neighborhoods that have been incredibly successful, not only in population increase, but former food deserts are no longer food deserts. In Bronzeville, you have a Mariano's, and you have the Walmarts and the shops and lofts. You have, for the first time in Woodlawn, a grocery store in 48 years. Coming to that neighborhood and community. That's also true, the last Dominic's in South Shore. And I think when you bring that coordination, and you are right, that it's sometimes, everybody talks about coordination, collaboration, but we have a unique culture here in Chicago can do that. You have 4 examples that are bucking the trend that are reflective of that strategy. And all of them now have new housing, both in the market on its own, and also stuff that we are co-investing in. All of them have different transportation, public transportation investments that we're making, and things that are happening on both either like Busy Bee Library in Bronzeville or the Ellis Park in Bronzeville. That gives both residents and the private sector the confidence to come in on either retail, whether it's a grocery store, whether that's a coffee shop and a restaurant, whether that's a gallery, that's also happening, that are also part of our Neighborhood Opportunity Fund investments. And that, to me, is how you bring coordination. It's hard, but okay, a lot of things are hard. But that actually, in my view, stands as an example. And there's other things that we're doing in other neighborhoods where the bigger piece is more on transportation and cultural institutions, meaning music venues or theaters that become spur for economic growth in the restaurant, bars, et cetera, et cetera. And so to me, that's how you do it. And we have, I think, examples of neighborhoods that are up in population, up investments, and up in residents that actually are a byproduct of what I call flooding the zone on transportation, schools, libraries, parks, and safety.
And you talked earlier about,
And I hate using the term flooding the zone, but bringing a coordinated investment strategy that now means that neighborhood is safer, families are moving back in, kids are going to school, there's investment in the commercial life that brings its own viability, and then that creates a virtuous circle. And it's not housing, it's not a train station over here, it's not a library over there, it's actually the building blocks of a neighborhood and a community.
We'll know every time you say flooding the zone, we'll harken back to that longer, more comprehensive explanation. This issue, though, of kind of coordination and how it happens, is a big one. And I know you have just announced creating a new department. How do you see that helping? I know that there has been a similar department in the past. What the experience has been, and why you think this is the right time for that initiative?
Well, look, I wasn't in City Hall in '08, but I was dealing with, at a different level, the product of one of the worst recessions in American history because of what happened in the housing market, mortgage market, etc. I don't want to second guess it, there may have been a rationale to put them in '08 on the cusp of that recession, back to planning and housing together. But as I said today, we have a different challenge. And that challenge is around affordability, it's around gentrification, it's around some of the consequences of that housing recession with empty homes and empty lots. And I think bringing a laser-like focus, taking it out of planning, giving it its own status, and to bring coordination not only to affordability, to bring to home ownership, to bring to gentrification, and also homelessness. And that's a part of the housing, I think, is the right move. I'm not interested in just creating another department. I think it's and while having shrunk other departments, meaning bringing some together, like the revenue and the comptroller, we all thought about this, discussed it. I think this brings an elevation to bringing, as we deal with how to keep and maintain affordability in certain neighborhoods, how to help take the transportation-oriented development that was around rail, and now I want to take it to the busy bus routes. It's not like Moses came down from Mount Sinai and said, you know what? TOD can only happen on rail lines. And no other city, Boston's done something on kind of like 2 blocks on a bus route. We have 4 bus routes that during the rush hour are busier than some of our busiest rail lines. So the question is, can that be an opportunity for transportation-oriented development with affordability components along either Western, Ashland, Chicago, and 79? And I think a department, standalone housing department, is exactly the right place to bring transportation in and planning and say, we want to use this as a extension, as we did in 2013 of TOD, as we did in 2015 with TOD. Now we're going to take the next iteration of this along bus routes. Second, large lots started in planning mainly to take lots that became a dumping ground for garbage, to say, okay, you're a homeowner, you're an investor in your neighborhood. For $1, we'll give you this lot if you make sure you improve it. Well, why shouldn't that be a place to coordinate now and say, okay, we're going to start to build affordable housing, standalone, not apartments. And these neighborhoods are on the cusp that in 10 years, you look around the corner, could probably have their own challenges to affordability. But if we invest now, maintain them as affordable, we're getting ahead of the problem, not trying to react to the problem. And when you react to a problem, it's much more costly than if you get ahead of the problem and start to lay the seed work for affordability. So that's a different approach. But we have not one issue in housing. The challenges in Pilsen, Westtown, Humboldt Park on gentrification and affordability are different than what Garfield Park, Englewood, or take Washington Park are all facing. And I think we need to be nimble to that. And then with always the same goal of how to build community and neighborhoods.
So you've kind of alluded to, at least in my mind, kind of the 3 areas in this. So it is affordable home ownership, affordable rentals, and then the issue of homelessness. You have rolled out several announcements over the last few weeks that address some of those. So if you think about those 3 areas, maybe I'm missing one, but at least those 3, what do you most want to make happen and see happen in each of those, and how do those, how do you balance the efforts in those 3 areas?
Okay, well, let's take homelessness. One of the, it's not an accident, or let me say, what you said, I'm trying to stick to your medical view. Seattle, San Francisco, and New York have some of the worst homelessness in America. They also have the highest tech-dominated economies. The byproduct of a booming tech economy is homelessness because of affordability. Our tech economy is taking off. We don't have the homeless. We have a homeless problem. We don't have what they have. Now that said, we have made major progress in eliminating homelessness among veterans. Now, if I'm going to be shameless, so I'm letting you, because we had a president who wanted to eliminate, at that time, homelessness among veterans, so we had a federal partner. We're at 85% of our goal, and Lisa Butler Morrison, who heads that effort, gives me a monthly prognosis of how we're doing. Housing for homelessness is one thing. The fact is, out of $1 you spend, almost 80% of it goes into social services. Only about 20. I mean, I don't mean to do it like this, but about 20 cents goes into the roof. And we're now evaluating tiny homes, and we're evaluating another way, and probably going to need both tools, which is rehab a home and have 10 homeless people live in that home, and then you can concentrate your social services that way. So that's. This is veterans over here and homeless over here. So that's one approach. Okay, I said that. This must be the Greek chorus part of this whole thing. The second thing is Alderman Walter Burnett and Alderman Marino came to me on Milwaukee and Westtown with an idea on how to handle gentrification. Short and long of it is, rather than pay X dollars into the ARO fund, the Affordable Housing Fund, you have to do 20% new on-site of affordability. So no more kind of get out of jail card, and I don't mean to use that term for developers, but no more of that. You like that too much, that laugh. Alderman Solis, Alderman Munoz, and Alderman Cardenas in my administration are really close in Pilsen and Little Village, a different way, which is those neighborhoods are gentrifying, is you, like the other neighborhoods, you don't pay into a fund. On the other hand, it's preserving what the affordability you have at 15 to 20% rather than 10%. There's that kind of neighborhood is going to be preserving. Westtown and Milwaukee is going to be new. And I think in a year from now, we're going to know which one works best. And I'll make a prediction. Don't know it. We haven't even started. You're going to realize that you need both. Both, yeah. Okay? Because I think this problem is, the question is, what can the public do to push against market forces to rebalance? Third, I'll also go out on a limb, which is you have take Woodlawn and East Woodlawn. They're not in the same place right now. So we're going to do this large lots, building homes, single-family homes, that will stay affordable for 10 years. You can look around the corner and see the neighborhood is about to change. Putting the seeds for affordability today, before that neighborhood gets too expensive, may prove to be exactly, and we're starting this as a pilot out in about 100 homes, standalone, in 6 neighborhoods. I don't want to predict and then tell the department, don't make a liar out of me. Now take this and expand it. So my view is we're going to see that. So this is basically developing the tools that deal with gentrification, preserving affordability, building new affordability, building new single-family homes that are affordable, and then dealing with the health of a new emerging tech economy that Chicago never had, but there are consequences, and then how to handle homelessness in a humane way that we actually are able to effectively deliver the services, not only the roof, but more importantly the services to help, whether it's on the mental health side or the drug rehabilitation or substance abuse issues. And to me, that's exactly what a department should do, and that's exactly how we're going to, my hope is that we have not just the policies, but in the end of the day, the policies to address the different challenges we have when we say housing writ large. It can't be assumed only by affordability, although that's the major driving factor. you don't want to get into a situation where a working family can no longer afford to live in the city. And one of the beauties of Chicago, for when I grew up, and my grandfather, my father, and mother, is Chicago was a place that a family can still afford to live, and that's under challenge by a lot of market forces and a lot of part of the economy that's really healthy. And that said, this is to push back and rebalance the scales of justice, so to say, and equity.
Yeah, great. Well, I think that's an incredible vision, and I think everybody would applaud that vision to be able to make that happen, and to have Chicago be a real role model in doing that. And I think there's a real opportunity there.
Well, first of all, we can't do it without the Chicago Community Trust. We can't do it now that's my shameless opinion. Well, here's an example. Here's an example. I mean, we can't do it without we can't do it without the banks, and we can't do it without the advocates and people that have been in the trenches for years. In the end of the day, I just want to take one thing out and use it as a story of a narrative of a larger. You guys have spent a lot of time in transportation-oriented development. Right. All of it is look, we have done 2 billion, 8,000 units in 5 years. Nobody has tried this along a bus route. I don't know if it's going to work. I have no idea. But I do know that I want to repeat it. It's not like it came down from Mount Sinai and said, only on rail. Right. Can't happen on a bus route. And I had CTA with planning come back and said, Western, which is the only route that runs literally the entire length north-south of the city, Ashland, where you're making all these transportation investments, synchronizing the lights, blah, 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 79th and Chicago are as busy on rush hour as your rail lines. Okay, well, that should be an opportunity to start to take a very successful policy, be honest. TOD worked much better than we originally thought. If you go back, you guys have done a lot of intellectual work. We got a lot of developers looking for other places. We have advocates. Maybe that should be, let's take these bus routes, and they are north-south, east-west, north side, west side, south side. Maybe this should be a unifying transportation idea, and nobody else in the country. But if it's successful, trust me, the one thing I know about mayors, we're going to claim that it's an original idea we had, and we're never going to give the other mayor the credit for this thing. But that, to me, is a thing that I think will work, or has the potential to work. Yeah, and it'd be great, maybe get more people riding on buses and also deal with our climate change issues. Well, the CTA just ordered 20 electric buses, so there. You touched on policies, and obviously programs are very important, and having sound programs, but programs without the right policies aren't going to stick. And cities are part of states, and states are part of a nation. And so what do we, unfortunately. Right now, after the last 48 hours, I'd like to pull out of this one nation and one state. Yeah, well, we probably don't have that option. That said, I don't know. I'm willing to challenge you on that. Who's here in favor of independence? A show of hands, okay? Independent nation of Chicago. Yeah. No, I'm going with Toronto. In the meantime, we still do have a state and a nation to deal with. Not necessarily the most favorable environment right now, but we do need policies that reinforce the kinds of programs we're trying to put in place here. What are some of the policies that we could be part of advocating for that would actually help to reinforce? I'm so glad you asked this, because it also says that housing's not on it. One is, this Sunday, if you don't know this, the minimum wage in Chicago goes up to $12. Okay? The state of Illinois is still at $8.25. I want this governor's race is as much about that minimum wage. I want Illinois to catch up to where Chicago's blazing a path. The second thing, if you're going to do taxes, and it will be a big debate in the governor's race, we did it in 2012, expand the earned income tax credit. Have it apply to single fathers, so they can start to actually be the fathers they want to be. Third, this is the thing that to me is, one of the reasons I went into public life. We're about to expand and go over 4 years to universal full-day pre-K for every 4-year-old in the city. And we're going to look. If you are poor, we have Head Start. If you are financially comfortable like Amy and I, you figure it out. Mm-hmm. If you work at any income level, it's $13,000 a year. And you are literally in a vice between being a parent, a mother or father, or an employee or employer, and it's wrong. And so we're doing it over 4 years because of the new school formula that we fought and won for. I'd love to, I know you probably know this by now, I'm not a very patient person. I'd like to do it over 2 years. I'd like to get it done as quickly as possible and not lose another generation and wait for kindergarten. I do think at the federal level, and I say this, we did the Red Line South. Mm-hmm. It's the biggest South Side investment on the public side. We're closing up the 95th Street station. It's $1 billion or just shy. I'd love to have a Department of Transportation to partner with us, and let's redo the Green Line. It goes from the west side right through the south side. And let's put companies and people to work like we did on the South Side Red Line to work rebuilding, because we're going to do a new station at Damon and Lake. We're doing 2 new Green Line stations, Garfield, all on the south side, that are part of the Washington Park Woodlawn. Mm-hmm. The station on the west side is also going to be right close to the hatchery, which is going to be a great entrepreneurship for food companies. Let's have a federal government that doesn't give lip service to infrastructure investments, but actually puts their money where their mouth is. And to me, whether it was a minimum wage, early childhood, expanding the earned income tax credit, truly investing in transportation and public infrastructure, to me, all those would actually complement. We'll take care. We've never in this city have shied away from a challenge. Mm-hmm. We don't do that. We're willing to face up, deal with all the complexities. I'd rather have, and I know when President Obama was president, we did our fair share, or some of my colleagues as mayors think we did beyond our fair share. We have when in the next 5 years, the entire Red Line will be rebuilt from Howard to 95th. It's got 39% of all the people that take all the CTA, buses and rail, go that line. That will be all in $6 billion. We're doing the new, yes, and today, that's the new blue. And small businesses are getting their first start at doing public work. People are getting their first jobs and trades through this work. I would love the federal government to be a partner again with the city investing in transportation. I would love a state that was not trying to fight public schools, but hold our kids up in our schools that are setting national standards and help us invest in full-day pre-K. I'll give you another one that I think is really, really important. Chicago's the only city that provides free community college if you get a B average in high school. And it's the only public scholarship. It's the only public scholarship in the United States that a dreamer can get. We're standalone.
Wonderful.
New York, California does not do what we do. I would love to work with Governor Pritzker on a statewide,
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to my shy self again. I would love to work with a governor that believes understands that in an economy where 3/4 of all the jobs require a minimum of 2 years post-high school education, how we basically make the next 2 years as universal as the first 12. And that doesn't force a family into a poor house, a second job, or a second mortgage to give their kids a shot at being good workers with a career, not just a job. And to me, I can go on and on, but literally we're trying to do these things alone. And the truth is we'd go farther, faster, and better if we had a partner in either Springfield or Washington. And when we had a partner, we went pretty far.
Yeah. Well, speaking of partners, and they're giving me the signal that I need
Well, give
to
them
start
the signal
wrapping.
back. Give them the signal, I give them back. If if we turn those suckers around, I'd give them the signal. Every time I'm having fun, they give you the signal. Okay? Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, so partners.
Yeah.
We put a lot on the city government, and city government has a lot of responsibility, but obviously you can't do it alone. So what's the role for private sector, not-profit sector, philanthropy, and the advocacy? I think you gave a nice advocacy agenda, but the community at large and community, how can the community be a partner and the other sectors be a partner in your vision?
Well, this is our vision.
Yeah.
And that's number one. Here's what I would say. There is a role for the not-for-profit, both on policy to work with us. And the community trust, you have done, I've read your reports on, I don't mean to use the shorthand, but on transportation or in development. We're about to do something literally outside of 2 blocks or 3 blocks in Boston. It's never been tried. Work with us. To the developers in areas, if you have, we gave you the roads we're doing, the streets. Western, Ashland, 79th in Chicago. You got ideas? We're going to start working on this. Okay, that's A. B, you know what we're thinking about on homelessness. And I got to say this, but I expect, and I've told this to all the banks, and the good news is, the banks were in this building. So this wasn't just CHA led, but they're co-investing. Jack, we're giving, $5 million, and he's going to go raise the other 25 from banks because we're the early money in. Our money is giving them the confidence to come in, and also, if there's a challenge, we're going to take the first hit, but that's the right role for the public versus the private sector. He could never leverage that dollars. So I want the not-for-profit, the developers, and not just a subset of developers. I want the other developers to come in and talk about affordability and come up with plans. And I want then the financial community and the community groups. And again, in the end of the day, it's not just housing. We're building neighborhoods and communities. If you have an apartment building, I don't mean to, I'm going to close where I started with Otis. I said to him, I said, where do you shop? Because up on the roof, we could see Aldi's. But not far from here is a Pete's. Not far from here was a Save and Shop. And I always come back to this example. If we built this housing that was empty, but there wasn't a new Walgreens coming in, and there wasn't a grocery store, it'd be an island. But if we actually flood the zone and get a train station, new paved roads, a neighborhood library, not far from here, the alderman knows we're going to be doing the new Adams Emmendale Park facility, which is our student support center, student sports center. You'll have 5 sports, you'll have mentoring and tutoring and teaching. You then have the building blocks and the glue that helps a neighborhood and a community to come together. And housing without retail or some of the basics of what we think when you moved here, you had 77 neighborhoods to pick from. But you look for certain things, you check for certain things. And in the end of the day, that's what I want all of us who love this city to work on together. And we'll have the we'll have the pulling and the toing and froing and et cetera. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to get to the same place. We're all trying to get to the place that where you're going to live, how you're going to raise your family, and it's going to be such a great experience that when your kids go to school and they graduate, they come back. Or if they come out of high school, they can find a job and live not far. And that's the goal. And we're all trying to get there, and there's different ways to get there. And I don't want to forget one thing, and it's because sometimes you want the whole issue out of sight. We're making progress on homelessness, but we have to work together to make sure that Lower Wacker is not home. We just got to, and it's more than just veterans on that issue. Okay?
One last question. You are impatient, which I think is good in a politician because we want these issues to be urgent and not something that we take as normal. But I think you also have a lot of optimism, or otherwise you wouldn't keep chipping away at some of these things. What makes you optimistic that this issue that others have tried and have not made progress, what makes you optimistic that this time you're putting in place the things that we will all look back 10 years from now and feel like this is a different city for housing and the things that impact neighborhoods?
Well, I'll give you one clearer example while we have our challenges. You know, 31 years ago, Secretary William Bennett called Chicago Public Schools the worst in the United States of America. There's a lot of public schools. To be called the worst, we also, and it's not the only reason, there are other reasons, but we had a big battle before you came here about taking the shortest school day in the United States of America and giving our kids back an hour and 15 minutes, 2 weeks every year, and going to full-day kindergarten for every child, not just some children. Now, there are other changes that were made. That said, 5 years in a row, Chicago leads the country in graduation growth by 3.5 times. Our 8th graders 2 years ago led the country in math gains, and our 4th graders led the country in reading gains, or one of their leaders, and we were one of only 3 school systems whose 4th and 8th graders, math and reading, both went up. And what was seen as an insurmountable problem that got you the label to be the worst, a Stanford researcher, a University of Chicago independently researched, and a UIC researcher said, what's going on in Chicago public schools need to be studied for what's right. We have a lot of work ahead of us. This is a solvable problem. And what is unique from our days as a city, from the Chicago Fire forward, is that when the not-for-profit, commercial business world, academia, advocates get together and set a goal. And remember, this was bigger than over my tenure on education. And when we set a goal, we may take us longer than the arc of one mayor's tenure, but we pretty much solve it. We pretty much get it done. And so we have all the makings. There's other cities, you know, Minneapolis now has a pretty a culture of coordination between the not-for-profits, but actually it's a replica of what we've done. And so my view is we have a problem that's unique to Chicago, which is we always were a place that middle-class families could still raise their kids. That's under attack because of the growth in our economy, which is a good thing, but that is coming under attack, which is you have this incredible growth economy and poverty, and the middle class are literally getting the middle class squeeze. And so our work today is more urgent than, not that it wasn't urgent before, more urgent, and we're in a different housing moment than we were in '08 in the beginning of the recession. So therefore, I think we can get this done.
Great.
And let me say this. We may not succeed, but we're going to get, but I will say this, we're going to get caught trying.
Great. Good. Not bad for a man who had oral surgery at 7 o'clock.
But I will tell you one, you don't know me well. Some people, the aldermen know this. My wife always advocated that we have a 4th child, and she was going to name it Patience as a subtle reminder on a daily basis. And I said, patience is a waste of time.
I would agree.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.